This is the Regenerative Real Estate Podcast. Revitalizing the world together. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. This is your host, Neil Collins. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I'm really looking forward to introducing our guest. His name is Eli Spevak. He's a local developer out of the Portland, Oregon area. He does such phenomenal developments, and the backstory that he has is very interesting. He is an affordability and community design-led kind of developer. It really fits in with the theme that we've had emerge out of the last couple of guests, including Ross Chapin and Jake Fry. If you haven't listened to those episodes, please go back, take a listen to them. Do that after you listen to Eli's podcast interview here. And what I find is helpful to go into these interviews is why don't you go just Google Eli Spevak right now on your phone, Google Eli or his company, Orange Splot LLC. Look at some of the photos of the projects that he does, because that'll give you a really good idea of, okay, what is he talking about? What is Eli and Neil talking about in this, so that you can get an understanding of exactly what community-led design projects look like. And I also want to briefly interject here that I really appreciate the work, and I really appreciate the ability to create this kind of work. And I am enabled to do that because of the company Latitude that we have. We are a sales and development company that help people live in more mindful and resilient ways. And for us, we are all about sustainability. And one of the big things for us that we are coming to realize, especially after doing this podcast, is that community orientation, it might be a bit of a urban planning buzzword, but it is quickly rising the ranks as one of the most important elements that you can possibly have if you want to live in a more sustainable future. In the meantime, if you want to learn more about what we're doing here, if you want to connect with other like-minded individuals, it doesn't matter if you're in real estate or an avid home gardener and you really like the content that we're putting out, or you even want to share, like, hey, this is somebody that I think that you should reach out to, you should interview. Maybe because I've been pulling a lot from our hometown and our home region in the Pacific Northwest, I might not know about the developers, the architects, the gardeners, the designers, whoever it is on the East Coast or in a different country. Hop on Facebook. We just created a new group called the Regenerative Real Estate Facebook group. I guess that's what you call it, but you can search for that. Become a member. It's not very built out right now. You are going to be at the ground floor level. It's going to be so exciting. And if you have not done it, please, please, please go to iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, wherever you're listening to this podcast, and leave us a review. That really helps give me feedback, as well as show the potential interviewees that there are people out there that really care about their work and the content that we're putting out. It really helps the show's rankings. And so the more great reviews and feedback that we get, the better and better this all gets, the more robust the Facebook community is going to get. And once again, I appreciate the ability to do this work and look forward to doing more. All right, enjoy the listening. Hi, everybody. This is your host, Neil Collins. I am excited to welcome a new guest on. It is Eli Spevak. Eli is the first person that is actually getting colloquially dubbed just by their first name in Portland. If you say Eli, most people know who you're talking about. He has been developing affordable housing communities in Oregon for over 20 years now, starting as a volunteer construction supervisor with Habitat for Humanity. In 2006, he launched Orange Splot LLC to build new models of community-oriented, affordable, and green housing development, ideally within an easy bike ride of his house, which I think is amazing. Eli was awarded a Loeb Fellowship in Advanced Environmental Studies at Harvard, GSD, co-founded a great website called accessorydwellings.org, co-founded Portland for Everyone, and now serves as Portland's Planning and Sustainability Commission. Eli, thanks so much for taking the time and coming on. I'm really looking forward to digging into your story.
My pleasure. Look forward to it.
Yeah, Eli, so I've read that you grew up in Washington, D.C. You're not a Portland native.
Mm-hmm.
and that your parents were the first people in the neighborhood to have panels on their house, PV panels. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. And I grew up in a row house in DC. So I'm, unlike many local Portlanders, I'm used to attached housing. Then my parents bought a house around a lot around the corner and built a house there that was on solar home tours for many years. Yeah.
What do you think got their interest sparked in having those panels? Like, what were they just of that mindset and ahead of their time?
I think that they're early adopter type personalities who knew about sustainability issues and knew that it was out there. And when they were designing a house, they're willing to go through the extra rigmarole to make it happen. Yeah.
So what you went to college, you got a degree in physics. What brought you out to Portland?
I never thought I'd be doing physics long term. I just loved doing it. And I was doing research in various parts of the country during summer breaks from college, Boulder, Colorado, Eugene, Oregon. That's the first time I've ever been out to the West Coast. And mostly I was looking for places I could do research and go backpacking. And I ended up working for Habitat for Humanity outside of Philadelphia in the East Coast after college, and wanted to keep working for Habitat, but have a place I could get outdoors more. So I was looking for options and found Portland was looking for a site super. And so I took that job originally for 3 months. I was working, Jeff Merkley was the director at the time. There was a volunteer corps of about 10 of us, and I decided to extend for a year, got to lead construction of a new house from the ground up. And I haven't moved since. I've loved it here.
Did you have construction experience at that time?
Nope, I wanted to learn that. I mean, I'd done a little construction with Habitat affiliated in Philadelphia, and my mom had been a carpenter. So I had a little bit, but I wanted to learn how to build houses. And so I did that through Habitat and then later on the affordable housing sector.
So how long were you at the Habitat?
Just a year and 3 months in West Philly, and then a little over a year in Portland.
Okay.
Yeah.
What came next? I'm sure there's a bit of time between there that between Habitat and starting Orange Splot.
Sure. Yeah. There's a few steps there. So after Habitat, I got a job working I always wanted to learn how to make ice cream too. So a board member owned Rose's Ice Cream. I volunteered there and I got paid to make a little living. I'm learning to make ice cream, which I still do today. After buying out their old equipment when they closed, I worked on a framing crew for a little while. I led crews of at-risk youth doing construction with nonprofits in the Portland area. And then I ended up going to work at Human Solutions doing affordable housing development, kind of a larger scale, like 30 to 60 unit developments with tax credit financing. And while that's how I got into the more production rental version of the affordable housing industry, which I still love. But it burned a lot of brain cells and I'm not doing it right now. So from there, I went to urban planning program at Portland State University, went back to school because I was interested in bigger urban planning issues. One of the projects I worked on with Human Solutions was development 42 units a block away from a light rail stop at 122nd and Ankeny, which was novel at the time because it provided very little parking for residents, one space per unit, which seems like maybe a lot now, but back then it was pushing the limits on what lenders would deal with in terms of a low parking ratio. But I got interested in urban development, planning our city around transit and walkable neighborhoods. And while doing urban planning, I segued into a job with the Housing Development Center, which did affordable housing in Oregon and Washington State, and did a series of projects that were of that sort of scale, doing originally construction management, then I started coordinating the financing on them as well. So all of that was happening in my professional life. My personal life at that time, I had bought a house using student loans in North Portland. I fixed it up, having housemates to help pay the mortgage. And I loved living in community. And that was the other piece that was driving my show. After a while, doing these larger multifamily projects, I missed the job site. I missed the hands-on work with residents. We'd hire a property management company. I wouldn't even meet the residents sometimes, even though there were people who really much needed the housing. And I started, so I had a chance with a friend to purchase a small plex together so we could live not just in group houses where we share all the kitchen with everyone else, but we have a community, but we have our own front door, as it were. And that was sort of this, I did that while I was still doing affordable housing development professionally, but that was sort of a segue to I had to create a company. So I made up Orange Splat, and we did that first project, and I thought it would just be a one-off to create a nice place for me to live and with some friends. But I kind of got hooked, and I kept finding new projects I wanted to do. So it became sort of a developer with ADD, one thing and then another different, but always with some community theme to it. And I continued working in the affordable housing sector. I learned condominium ownership structures, and I did that with nonprofit as well, a co-housing project in Corvallis. But I mostly was working for myself at that point. And yeah, that's how I kind of rolled into this world.
What was it? First off, I love that you used your student financing on buying a property.
They give you money for room and board, so board means housing, so that helped me pay the mortgage payments.
It's a liberal interpretation of it for sure. But what is it about the community aspect that was really drawing you? Because for most people, they're going down a trajectory of like the white picket fence. This is the American dream. What spoke to you about another way?
Starting with Habitat and going into a couple of group houses since then, I was living at various times with 3 to 5 other people just to make ends meet, because I wasn't getting paid much at all in affordable housing as a volunteer mostly. And I loved it. I like living with housemates. Many of the friends I have still in Portland are people I met because I lived in a group house with them at some point in the past, or friends of friends. And I'm an introvert. And I've always had friends closer to where I live. So some people have really rotten experiences with group housing situations. I can totally imagine how that could happen, but mine were positive. And I realized that as I wanted to have more independence, have my own dwelling unit, to share with either my own or with a partner, I didn't want to lose that community that I was having with friends who I met along the way, or met through my housing, randomly. So I was looking out there, and there weren't that many places to do that in Portland. I mean, I really, I loved I was in my, late 20s, early 30s at that point. I was not married, not yet. And I just wanted to be able to live near people who I had some shared values with, and I would get to hang out with. And then when I became married and had kids, then it became even more wonderful to live in a community. Because at that community I mentioned, where we created a little courtyard plex, Peninsula Park Commons, eventually kids started popping out, 1 per year, and it was wonderful. Living in a small home, low carbon footprint, just passing kids stuff from one family to the other. Many people had relatives not in town, and the kids had natural play buddies. It was just a really nice way to start a family. So some of the benefits of community ratcheted up a notch when it started becoming families, and then eventually intergenerational is nice too, because it's nice to have some proxy grandparents in town. And it's nice for them too to see little kids scampering around who they don't have to change the diapers of.
That's definitely a catalytic moment whenever you have kids, because for us, we had a child, and it gets to a point whenever you want free range kids, and you want to have those community bonds that I think it was for us, people would see our son drawing on the sidewalk alone, and we could see him out the window, and people would get out of their cars and they'd say, "Do you know your child is outside?" And you just realize that the orientation of our built environment is so isolating, and we're not used to that. So what year did you form Orange Splat?
2006.
In 2006. Were you aware of the foreshadowing of what was to come based upon the name of? I love the book, The Orange Splat, by the way. And if anybody listening out there doesn't know this book, you need to go see it, because I think the book's message actually follows what your work has done here in Portland. There's a lot of parallels, at least. Mm-hmm. What were you thinking of at that time? Was it just a one-off project, or were you thinking more of you're going to be a general contractor, or was it always the development route?
I picked the book because I loved the book when I was a kid, and still do now with my kids. And it really is about expressing your individuality and like doing it your own way sometimes, and art as well. So I picked the name because when you create a nonprofit or create a company, even if it's just for a short, you have to make a name for it. So it was definitely on a lark. At that point, I had never worked for myself. I didn't really expect to work for myself long term. I started to eventually evolve that way. I didn't even think I was the kind of personality to work for myself, frankly. But I wanted to experiment. And I think that after that first project, Peninsula Park Commons, that was when I came to the turning point. Do I go back to doing affordable housing development, which I also enjoy, or do I go and just try and do some creative infill development that I'm not seeing happening? And I really was looking for something more tactile, work with, maybe use my Spanish with Spanish speaking subs. I mean, do some more hands-on stuff, because I missed that. And also I was ready to play around, and I love the accessory dwelling units. That was something that Portland legalized but didn't encourage at the time. And I learned condominiums, so I hatched this idea that I could do 2 houses and 2 ADUs on adjoining lots and have them each be owned separately. And I found a property to do it on in Sabin, and that became Sabin Green Project. And that had been done before, and it worked. And it was a big learning curve. And that got me sort of thinking more broadly of, hey, if I can just keep trying these things out and seeing if they work. And, if they do work, then great, people can just copy and paste and roll with it. Once I do it once, I'm not as interested in doing exactly the same thing again, but more power to those who will. And it was a way, the other thing that was pivotal there is that with affordable housing finance, it's complicated and it's heady and it kills brain cells. And I started thinking, well, what can the market sector do that would achieve some similar goals? And that's why I sort of love accessory dwellings and other kinds of infill, because it can be done at a discrete level. You don't have to hit your head against the wall with financing options. And by virtue of their size, they are smaller. They're smaller carbon footprints, less expensive rent than any other house in the neighborhood. And they work for the kind of folks who are getting older, who don't want to who may have mobility issues, and it works for young folks who just can't break into the housing market. And there weren't that many getting built. So that really got my policy wheels spinning, and trying to think of how, if it you can achieve a lot of public goods with this kind of housing. So I started getting interested in the policy world to try and make it more broadly available.
To go from just building a couple of accessory dwelling units, and I think you were instrumental in the tiny house movement as well, of putting either stick built or tiny house on wheels on your properties. What was the evolution like to go from very small site development projects to what you're doing now? Is, I would consider, a big bite for somebody if they wanted to go in and do a development project. You're now up, I think your latest project is over 20 homes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. It's for anyone out there who wants to be a developer, taking steps up in size that are manageable is important. It would have been stupid for me to take on one of these larger projects earlier on, and I could never have afforded to do it anyway. I wouldn't have had the equity. So I think people get into development from all sorts of directions: real estate, framing crews, framers do it. People who study in school. I mean, there's a lot of routes in, and so I started small and did a couple of detached tiny homes. I worked a lot with, I've never actually done a whole tiny house community on wheels, but I have a couple of them that I've had fun with. I worked with Dignity Village for a while. That's where I got, they were locating themselves, where I became more appreciative of how the zoning and building codes conspire against housing option that's in between the cost of a tent and a full house. There's a huge gap there. And so part of what I've been doing, trying to fill that gap with other options. But in terms of scaling up, I did a 8-unit project with the Land Trust, Community Land Trust. That was a step up in size for me. I went back to Peninsula Park Commons and did 3 new homes to add on what used to be a parking area, abutting the 7-plex that I worked on before. And partnered with someone to do the 16-home Cully Grove community, did a 14-home community on my own. Now I'm doing a 23-home community. I don't really want to get bigger than that. But the other thing is that my financing is traditional construction loans from a lender, and then I've gotten private loans from individuals, friends and family. And that doesn't scale in the way that institutional money can scale. It's people who lend money, they believe in the projects, they like to see it tangible, their investments on the ground, as opposed to maybe in a stock market somewhere. And, but you can't just like say, okay, I'm suddenly instead of a $7 million project, I'm going to do a $20 million project and suddenly have that much more money available to make it happen. That's not the way I've got stuff financed. So in some ways that's limiting, but not a big deal because I don't really want to do the really large projects anyway. I like to do smaller ones.
What's been the receptivity of the people that are moving into these places? Are they pre-buying them, or is it a small community of folks that are seeking you out, or do you find the general public?
Some people definitely sort of keep track of orange spot projects, and if there's one coming up that meets their time frame and their what kind of home they're looking for, then they'll jump in. But we're always getting new folks in. I mean, there's a lot of the strongest demand point I find, for at least for the most recent projects, are folks who have young kids who realize that they want to raise them in, like you were saying, in a setting where they can play with their neighbors and keep an eye on them, but they also can have some room to roam. Also, I see quite a few single parents. If someone's gone through a separation and they need more support, and sometimes it's nice just to have other parents around who can exchange childcare and stuff like that informally. I also see a lot of demand from empty nesters whose kids have moved away. Maybe they own a house in Irvington or somewhere closer in. They have a lot of equity in it, but the kids have all moved away. No families with kids haven't been able to afford to live in that neighborhood, and they're getting a little older themselves. Maybe they're getting close to retirement, but they got a good 20 years of like active life, and they want to be among friends. Maybe they've been with their partner for a long time. The kids have gone, and it's like, I kind of want to have other grown-up stimulus instead of just my partner all the time. So I see a lot of demand from people who want to live their values as they go into retirement. And part of their values are to be able to grow things on the property, solar energy, and live in community. So those are the two biggest market sections I'm seeing.
Do you find that they're becoming multi-generational by design, or just that's who's coming to the property and buying?
It's a little bit by design, and frankly, it wasn't intentional sometimes, but the Coley Grove project is one example where there's 16 homes. All of them have stairs inside. Some have ground floor bedrooms, but some don't have ground floor bedrooms. And the empty nesters, we were pre-selling the project, swept in and grabbed all the ones with the downstairs bedrooms, pretty much. And frankly, if they had all had downstairs bedrooms, they would have stepped up the whole project. Because when it comes to competing empty nesters against young folks starting families, the empty nesters can outbid the others any day of the week, if it's what they want. So the fact that we didn't have, some of the units were not that great for people who might have, stair issues coming forward, it allowed a little more time for younger families to grab those units up.
Oh, interesting.
That wasn't intentional, but it actually helped create a mix of residents that there was a little while when we were and this happened for Coley Green, the project we're building right now, 23 homes, and out of the first 7 pre-sales before we broke ground, one of them had a 2.5-year-old and a really young baby. Everyone else was an empty nester. And it got up to 9 that way. And then eventually I just put a kibosh and said, I want to have a mixing. Everyone here wants to have a mixed generational community. And I basically said, I'm only going to take buyers who've got kids for a while. I had time. And in Oregon, you are allowed to preference people based on who have kids. You can't discriminate against them, of course. So I had to have that conversation with an attorney and a real estate agent. And now we have 13 kids in the project, and everyone's a little bit happier.
That's amazing.
And so I guess there is a little bit of social engineering in there. But it's social engineering that the empty nesters appreciate, because they actually don't want to live in a community that's a retirement community either. And the young families, because one of the reasons they're there is because they want their kids to have someone to play with.
How much do you think the conception of your developments have come from the market versus what you've wanted to live in yourself? I take it that you're actually living in somewhere you've built.
Oh yeah, I've been living in one of these. I don't keep bouncing from community to community, but I lived in one, the first one I mentioned, for 7 years, and the one I'm living right now, we've lived here for 7 years and plan to continue doing so. Yeah, I would say that I'm driven more by communities that I would want to live in. I had early advice when I was in the first project that when we were converting this 1938 courtyard plex into homes, and the advice was, make sure you design these homes so that real people who would really want to live there. Don't do it based on hypothetical buyers. And that's good advice. And so when I do communities, I make sure that it would actually be a place I would like to live. And that's not going to be mean I get it's not going to work for everybody. Some people, these would be really poor matches, to be frank. But I have a comfort level that there are real people who would want to live here, which you have to have, or else it's crazy to take the huge risk to build one of these things, borrow a huge amount of money, and hope for selling them.
One of the things that I really like about walking through your projects is not only are you pulling from the pocket neighborhood design philosophy, but just the shared type of amenities that you've designed in there. Do you want to just tell our listeners what that experience would be like for a resident to live in one of your pocket neighborhoods?
Yeah, sure. Well, the one I live in right now, we've got a common house. It's about a little over 1,000 square foot building that we all share. The ground floor has a kitchen in it, a gathering space large enough. It's bigger than anyone's living room. So you could, if you have a birthday party or a wedding reception or a wake or a community meeting, you can host it there rather than in your house. And there's always dishes there for 40 people and plates and tables and chairs and all that. Music performances, puppet shows, you name it. It's just nice having a place outside your house to host. And for people who work for themselves, they could actually have meeting with clients there. Upstairs is a couple guest rooms. So if you have a mother-in-law coming to visit, they can stay there instead of in your house, which you might find is good for you and for the mother-in-law who doesn't want to be woken up by kids in the morning. So having guest rooms outside your house means you don't have to have a house with an extra room in it for those occasional times you're hosting a visitor. You can do it in the common house. We also have large garden areas. So some people have private gardens, but also there's sort of a shared garden area. And that's where the gardeners can chit chat with each other, teach those who don't know as much, share information. And it's a really social area. We have a little grove of trees where the kids just play outside as a group with a tree house and rotating play equipment. We've got groups of residents have teamed up to have chickens. So there's like 3 households have one chicken coop, 3 households have another chicken coop. If that's your thing, great, go for it. If it's not your thing, then you don't have to attend to it. You just get to hear them chirping. And so there's an opportunity for initiative. Once for a while, for 4 years in our community, parents who had kids of similar ages who were young had a breakfast club in the common house, which meant the parents took turns cooking for 3 to 7 kids each morning of the week. So I would cook one morning a week, and the kids would have breakfast there at 7 o'clock, and then they would go off to their respective schools 40 minutes later. And the times I'm not cooking, I'm just doing whatever I want. My kids are not in my house, which is fantastic. So it was a great division of labor that got kids sort of to have a sit-down breakfast, which is unlikely, frankly, to happen in anyone's individual home, and different food each morning. And then they had a nice transition to get out the door to their school. So those are just a few examples. Other community I'm building right now, it's gonna have a sauna in it. There's nice campfire areas sometimes in communities. The bigger the community, the more you can create common areas. A small community like 2 houses and 2 ADUs, they just got a little straw clay and cob structure that's a little guest room. It can be a little music retreat house built into a small lot. The larger community, I did one project down in Corvallis. It's 32 units where they had their own leadership, but I worked with the finances and legal structure out for it. And that one's got a huge common house with a library, a commercial kitchen. You can cook 1 meal a month and eat 3 meals a week for dinner. We have shared meals in our common houses and other projects too, but they're not as frequent. So anyway, there's a lot of upsides. Yeah.
How frequent are the shared meals?
Well, COVID has interrupted this, but outside of that, we have work parties once a month, and after that, we have a shared meal, lunch. We also have about once every 3 weeks, we have a time where a couple households team up to make a whole lot of food, anything they want, and everyone just comes and eats. And then also once every 2 weeks or 3 weeks, we have a potluck where people just bring whatever they like to share and have a community meal. So we have a mixture of types of shared meals, which is wonderful. It's a way to catch up with people you might not have seen in a little while, but it's not as intensive as a regular shared meal program. That larger co-housing communities, that's pretty common.
Yeah, I've actually read that there's a correlation between the number of shared meals and the success of the community over time, where some are once a month, some are once a day. The interesting thing about community is that it's not always roses and rainbows, but it can be quite messy. As a developer, I would imagine a lot of your cohort is put off by the thought of inducing that level of intentionality and brain damage, and not even brain damage, but just having to think a little bit deeper and think long term. What do you put in place? Do you bring in outside consultants, or are you just kind of winging it and hoping for the best that everybody will organize themselves?
Well, I think you're right. That's why traditional developers are skittish about this idea, and you don't see people doing spec co-housing communities very much. We have learned a lot of good best practices, and because things, as you say, messy things do come up, and the key skill set for a community is to deal with those and move forward. So we make sure that communities have a training, and I pay for it as part of my budget for facilitated consensus decision making and conflict resolution. Those are some just core skills that communities need to have. And frankly, if you were trying to share things with your neighbors up and down the street, you need the same thing there. And it's also, I try and design communities that are kind of meeting-like, because one thing that can be overwhelming is to have a lot, like too many meetings. It can become too much of a burden for, especially people who've got busy other lives, which having kids or large nonprofit commitments, volunteer commitments just don't have enough time to manage the community. So and the other thing I do is to write into the condominium documents some expectations. So the expectation people will participate into self-governance. Decision making is by consensus with a fallback to majority vote if at 2 attempts we don't get there. So if it's really a divisive issue, it's possible to get past it and move on. And having been in 2 communities, 14 years total, we've never had a vote in either of them. So communities really are good at getting things worked out, but it can be challenging. But yeah, I think that there are some things that we can do in setting up communities. And as I've done the most recent 2 communities, we've been able to look backwards and just pull out the good practices for using the common house, for pet policies, for which kind of communities make sense to have. So there's less reinventing the wheel, which gives communities a good jumping off point.
Do you share that openly, or is that the Orange Splat's proprietary information?
Oh no, we share. Someone just has to ask me, but yeah. And I mean, and actually the legal documents we just post it's on the website, coleygreen.org, or Orange Splat will link you out to the Mason Street Townhomes Project, the Coley Green Project, and there's a set of legal documents which includes all the condo docs, declaration bylaws, all the rules that we have, open source it, and then community. We have some good sort of community policies we worked out over time, and there's more on a national website, the cohousing.org, which is a great compendium, because of course we're not always inventing the wheels ourselves. Around the country, people have come up, you name an issue, someone's grappled with it, and has come up with some sort of policy to share.
I'm going to switch streams on us just a little bit, because what I find is that a lot of developers work within zoning and they build out what's permissive by law. But your career seems to, from the outside, have followed a different track where you might be 1 or 2 steps ahead of what zoning code currently allows for. And you've done a lot of policy advocacy work that, knowing the political state across the country and particularly locally, must be frustrating, albeit rewarding. What made you want to get politically active? And I say that politically active in the sense that you're not running for mayor, but you are regarded as an influential player in rewriting our zoning codes.
I've always been an activist at heart, and I think that it didn't take me long in the built environment to realize how current zoning holds back some of the kind of projects I think we should have more of in our city, in cities. So I've worked, and I'm not intimidated by the public processes, I guess. It takes a willingness to go to meetings and read documents and geek out on the zoning code. So as examples, in Portland, we worked to change the rules for accessory dwelling units back in 2010. Got some changes done, waived some fees, and it's taken off from 30 ADUs a year to, at the peak, well over 1 per day being built in Portland. I worked with a nonprofit to try and change the rules for what you can build in residential neighborhoods. Current zoning has got some really exclusive tendencies to it, where you have to have a certain piece of land that's expensive to build a house. That house is going to be worth 3 times as much of the land value. So you basically set a floor for the least expensive housing you can have in a whole neighborhood. And it's a pretty high floor. as the land values increase. So trying to figure out a way that you can take older houses and split them up into multiple units, not just do one ADU, but do two ADUs, corner duplexes. There's a lot of cottage clusters is a great example where you get twice as many homes as long as they're half the size. There are lots of zoning code reforms that cities can take. So I advocated the city make some of these changes, and many of them got rolled into the residential infill project, which increases the options in a house, but it also decreases how much massing you can do on a site. Heading to city council very soon. And then I guess the way I think of my work is that I do the projects to showcase what can be done. And I sometimes get kind of creative with the rules. And then I know that I'm not going to scale as a developer. So the way to have more of an impact is to change the rules of the game. So we have coming up some projects. One is group housing. Like if you have more than one household definition of family, there's a cap of how many people can live in a house, which ends up discriminating against co-living and roommate situations. It's not enforced because frankly, it's probably not illegal by the state constitution because it involves the city getting involved with who's related to who. But still, there's a code update coming up, which is going to clean that up and make it, I think, a fair process for group living situations. And I also work nationally with AARP. They provide technical assistance to groups all over the country. So I get to work with 6 to 8 jurisdictions each year, helping them change their rules to allow accessory dwelling units and other middle housing options. And it's borne some fruit. Code changes in Vermont, in Omaha, Nebraska, in the suburbs around Boston. Chicago's doing a big initiative on ADUs. So it's nice to sort of work outside of our local jurisdiction. And then of course, the state of Oregon has been a great leader on this too. I mean, with House Bill 2001, it kind of forces the hand of jurisdictions to allow more housing options and less expensive ones in any neighborhood. I like the policy, you can tell.
I think the interesting thing is whenever the residential infill project kicked off, it was conceived of like a 16-month process,
right?
Where over 4 years into it, I believe, and then the state came in and they just in one fell swoop changed a lot of the zoning and is now forcing the hand at Portland. And for all those listeners that aren't local to Portland, I'm sorry that you're having to geek out on our local zoning code, but what do you see the residential infill project coming to head sooner rather than later?
Well, coming to head meaning going to effect.
Getting passed and we actually know which way's up from down?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's literally on the city council's agenda. It was going to be on the agenda a couple months ago, but with COVID, a couple other things jumped in front of it. But it's going, I think, June 3rd, or it's very soon, is hitting city council. And then the city will probably get sued over it, and they might not put it into effect till they've gotten through the appeals process. So I think there is more waiting to be done. But big picture, it, as you say, it implements House Bill 2001 quite well, I think. I think the other cities in the state will look to it to figure out how they're going to implement that state mandate. And I was originally leery about the state stepping in to force local jurisdictions to update their code, but I've come to think that it's probably a good plan in a lot of places because the local politics can make it impossible to legalize accessory dwelling units, for example. Just too much concern from neighbors about how it's going to destroy the neighborhood. It won't. It'll provide less expensive housing options. And so Oregon required every city to allow ADUs. I can't remember how many years ago that was. California has had that requirement for a decade. Washington State the same. And at some point, the state's got to step in and say, hey, it's not fair for some jurisdictions to allow less expensive housing types, but others can exclude them. And so I think that there is a good case for the state having a hands-on approach in some of these areas so that zoning doesn't propagate as an exclusive tool used by some communities and other communities try and use it more progressively. There's got to be a little, because even in some of the most affluent parts of a city, Dunthorpe, Lake Oswego, whatever, you still have people working retail, teaching school, and there needs to be places for them to live there.
That's really fascinating. We could go off in a million different directions from there, but I do want to respect your time. I think it's fantastic the work that you're doing. Is to wrap up, is there anybody or people that you can really look to of like, hey, those are the people that I really gained a lot of inspiration from of just the guideposts that you followed their careers or philosophies?
Well, you've already talked to Ross Chapin. I think he's fantastic at community-oriented design. Mark Lakeman, I met working with Dignity Village residents and him to design their new community. And I don't know anyone with a better design sense for community than Mark and his team. I think that, there's some great leaders beyond the Portland area. Lynn Richards, one who runs the Congress of New Urbanism, to take that organization a focus away from greenfield development and into using our cities better. And then there's, maybe I'll leave it there. I think that there's some great leaders in this world nationally, and so even though Portlanders are really good at navel gazing, we do still have a lot of stuff to learn from outside.
I'll actually give Mark Lakeman a plug here for an upcoming conference that they have with the City Repair Project, which is the Village Building Convergence. And this is going to be the first year due to COVID that it's going to be digital. And it's all about placemaking. And placemaking is such an integral part to community orientation and community design. So if anybody listening is interested, it's at the end of May and the beginning of June. I highly encourage you reaching out. It's just a fantastic group of people. And I know Mark Lakeman had co-founded that. Mm-hmm. But Eli, I appreciate the time. I really appreciate the work that you're doing. With your latest project, are you doing pre-sales right now?
Yeah, we've sold 17 of them out of 23. 2 of the ones remaining, one is a land trust unit, so we're just waiting on getting a funding reservation to make that one available. The other is an existing house that we won't sell it till it's renovated. It's rented right now. And so we have a few more left, but not very many. So if people are wanting to check it out, then cullygreenpdx.com, and you can see what's available. And it's a great community. They're meeting remotely, mostly, occasionally on an open air setting, to try and figure out how the community is going to be like. And we're ahead of schedule. We thought it would be done in February of 2021. Now it's looking more like October of this year. So looking forward to wrapping that one up.
It's sped up the timeline. You don't hear that very often.
Subs are more available nowadays, as work has ground to a halt in Washington State and slowed down a little bit in Oregon. People are sending us more crews to our job site, so we're taking them and we're working safely, but we're moving forward.
And I will link to cullygreenpdx.com and our website. I've toured your projects. I will say I would have been one of the early ones to jump on the bandwagon and move into one of your projects if we hadn't have ripped out all of our landscaping and our grass and planted everything from seed, and because it's such a grounding experience to grow up with your plants. And that's been the one thing that's really held us back. But if not, then Orange Spot is squarely on our radar, and we do drive a lot of people to go check out your work. So thank you so much for your time, Eli.
Thanks for hosting, John. Yeah. Take care.